In this how-to video, we're going to cover suspension upgrades. In particular, how can it improve the ride of your bike, will it fit your bike, and compatibility issues either with wheel size, axle type, brake type, or any other factors that can come into play. So the first topic we want to cover is, why would we upgrade suspension forks? The main reason for this is exactly the same reason suspension forks exist on the bike in the first place. It's to maintain grip and control by keeping the bike in contact with the ground. What this means is the more contact that you have with the ground, more control, more grip is available, enabling you to brake, corner, and provide traction for powering the bike forwards. What suspension does is it eliminates larger bumps than what would have been taken up by the compression of the tyre. Therefore, suspension can control the contact that the bike has with the ground and enable you to ride faster and smoother over rougher terrain. Compression and compression adjustment controls the speed that the fork compresses at. By having a greater amount of compression resistance and dampening means that the fork will compress slower for the same exerted force. Rebound or rebound dampening is perhaps the most important feature of a suspension fork. Without this feature, a suspension fork would operate much like a pogo stick, being charged with energy as it compresses and then exploding off with the same energy would mean that the bike would lose contact with the ground and the rider on top of the bike would lose control. By transferring the energy and using it internally in the fork, the suspension fork compresses and then controls a slow re-extension of the fork back to its full amount of travel. Rebound dampening is what maintains the contact between the fork and the ground. Suspension travel is the amount of movement available on the fork and also the amount that's used. Therefore, on a fork such as this, that can take 160 millimeters of travel maximum, the amount that we're using as we compress the fork will be a smaller amount. As the fork reaches its maximum amount of travel, it will bottom out. As your budget increases and the amount you spend on a suspension fork goes up, you'll get additional features. In particular, you'll find that there may be low and high speed compression and rebound control as well. This fork here in particular, it has a travel adjust feature. What this does, at the flick of a switch, it controls the amount of travel and the ride height of the fork. Therefore, in a climbing situation, at the minimum travel, the front handlebar will be lower, making a better off-road climbing position. And at the maximum amount of travel, the fork will be extended, providing a longer travel suspension fork, able to absorb larger bumps for higher speeds on descents, and raising the handlebar height for better control. The travel available on different forks is going to be there for different purposes. On lighter cross-country applications, we're going to see something with around 100 millimeters, maybe 120 millimeters of travel. On something that's a little bit more all-mountain or gravity enduro friendly, such as this, you're going to see between 140 and 160 millimeters of travel. And as the application gets more aggressive and more extreme, for downhill and freeride forks, you're going to see between 180 millimeters, such as on this fork, and 200 on the fork at the end. The amount of suspension travel, or the size of the fork that you can fit to your bike, is going to be limited by the design of the bike and its intended use. For example, a hardtail with a 120mm fork on it is going to be limited to either a fork between 100 and 130mm without affecting the handling too much. If I was to go to anything larger, the problems would be that we would create unnatural handling and potentially put much greater stress on the frame. Moving outside of the fork's recommendation can also void the warranty. Another characteristic of the bike which is going to affect what forks will be able to fit on it is the wheel size of the bike. If it's a 26-inch wheel, 650B wheel, or 29-inch wheel, there will need to be a specific fork to fit that frame. As you can see, with this 26-inch wheel fork, alongside the 29-inch wheel fork, the actual crown length here, the lower section, is going to need to accommodate a larger or smaller diameter wheel. The next consideration of whether the fork is going to fit your bike is what steerer tube size that you require. Originally, most forks have come with a 1 1/8 straight steerer tube. However, when it comes to upgrade time, it's important to consider whether your bike comes with a tapered steerer tube. These are becoming more and more commonplace. It enables a fork's crown and steerer to be much stiffer in structure, but what this means is if your frame is designed for a 1 1/8 straight tube steerer, a 1 1/8 to 1.5 tapered steerer fork will not fit. And in some cases, bike frames and forks can have a 1.5 inch straight steerer. This does improve strength and stiffness, however, does not feature on particularly many bikes. If your bike originally came with V-brakes, as opposed to either a cable or hydraulic disc, you may find quite a limited choice when it comes to upgrade options, unless you decide to change the brake type and the front wheel type. What you'll commonly see on upgraded forks is 2 tabs on the rear of the left fork leg. This will be where the disc brake will mount onto the fork. If it was a V-brake compatible fork, you'd expect to see 2 posts on the front of the fork, the pivot points for the brake. This fork features a carbon crown and carbon steerer to reduce the weight, and also provides a lockout feature, which means that on the fly you can lock out the suspension fork to improve efficiency. On suspension forks you'll see 3 different axle types: the original 9mm quick release axle type, 15mm through axle, still for lightweight applications, and finally the 20mm through axle, used for heavy duty and downhill riding in particular. A lot of research and development has gone into developing better suspension forks. With that, there's been an introduction of a lot of new technology and increased cost. There's a wide variety of what you can spend on upgrading suspension. However, upgrading from an entry-level mountain bike, there's a vast improvement as far as performance that can be made.